What's up guys, Shawnthebro here, and in today's episode of the first person shooter tutorial series, we are going to be going over a hurt/damaged screen effect. So when we take enough damage, these little things that I'm walking into are little traps, little spikes on the ground. Once I've taken enough damage, I want this red screen effect to pop up, and basically this indicates that I am low on health. Now, when we heal or when we die and end up respawning, we want to make sure we get rid of this effect as well. So if I continue to walk into all these traps, I eventually die, and I'll play my death animation and my respawn animation, and you'll notice that the hurt or damaged screen effect is no longer there. But if I get hurt again, past a certain threshold, which I've set to be 25% of my max health, then I get this screen effect here again. So that's what we're going to be covering today. It's a really fun episode. I really like the screen effects. You can do so many different things with them because you can make your custom screen effects. If you want, get really creative with it and show off what you can do with these hurt and injured screen effects. Before we hop into this episode, I do want to give a huge shout out and thank you to my Patreon members and my YouTube membership subscribers. Thank you guys so much for the love and support, and consider following me on either of those as well if you're interested in donating and assisting the channel. Additionally, if you want to get caught up in the series before you watch this episode, you can check out everything we've done so far, such as aiming down sights with weapons, picking weapons off the ground, and interacting with the world. I'll link the playlist in the top right corner right here so you can check it out if you'd like. Otherwise, I would recommend checking out this episode right here, which is where we went over death logic, because we are going to use that today to reset our screen effect back to the default state. And so you may want to have that just to make sure everything is working as intended. But with that out of the way, guys, we can go ahead and get started. So this is a C++ and Blueprint tutorial, so we're going to start in the code today, and specifically I want to go to my FPS tutorial character.h. In here, I want to make sure that I have functions or implementable events that can trigger the screen effect and also remove the screen effect. So I'm scrolling down in here to where I go to my functions, and I have two new functions today. One that I've called enable damage VFX or visual effects, and one I call disable damage VFX. So quite simply, enable damage VFX is going to turn on the screen effect, and we can also do other things with it in the future. And disable damage VFX is going to remove the hurt screen effect and any other effects that you added during enable damage VFX. Now, these are Blueprint implementable events because I am going to put the screen effect directly on the HUD and we're going to animate it on there. So we don't need to do anything with it in the code, but we do want to be able to trigger it in the code. So turn it on or turn it off. So to set these up, I have void enable damage VFX, and that is a U function. That is a Blueprint implementable event. Again, this means we can set up the logic in the blueprint, but we can call it in the code. I've given it a category of HUD as well, but that's not required. This is just an organizational thing so we can find it more easily. Then I have void disable damage VFX, which is also a U function. That is a Blueprint implementable event with a category of HUD. Now, once we make those two functions, again, we don't have to, in fact, we can't fill out the logic in the code. They're going to be filled out in the blueprint. But we do have to make sure that we call them. So I'm going into my FPS tutorial character.cpp, and I'm going to scroll down to my take damage function. The take damage function is where we are taking damage, and thus that is when we would want this to occur. Once we've fallen below a certain threshold, or anytime we take damage, depending on your logic, you could trigger this. So here is my entire take damage function. Almost all of it was in here before. There's just one little thing that I'm adding. But to give you a quick rundown, if we're not already dead, we determine the damage amount based on the damage that was passed into the function, and if we should ignore shields or ignore health. Sometimes you may want to ignore one type of damage or one type of component on the character from taking damage. So for example, in Apex Legends, if you get stuck in caustic gas, then you're going to take health damage but not shield damage. So you might ignore shields or you might ignore health. Long story short, when we're taking health damage is where I'm going to display the hurt screen effect, but you can modify this and place it where you want. So I'm going down to where we should not ignore health. So assuming we should take health damage, And here we're doing health minus equals the finalized damage, which is the damage we end up receiving after all the other damage has been applied to the shield. This is what's left over. And if the health is less than or equal to 0.0f, we just cap it at 0, and then we call the die function and kill the character. But if the health is less than or equal to 25%, but not less than or equal to 0, they're still alive, but they are less than 0.25 of their health, or 25% of their health. At this point, I'm going to enable the damage VFX. Again, it is entirely up to you where you put these, so you don't have to follow this directly. But I've added this else if statement just to make sure the health was within the 25% remaining. So we're not above 25%, but we're also not dead yet. At this point, we want to enable the damage VFX. So just call your function that we just made in the header file, and we'll be good to go. Funnily enough, I don't have a way to actually heal in this game yet. We do have a way to respawn, and once we respawn, we do heal, but we don't actually have a way to heal. So if you have a way to heal, I would recommend calling disable damage VFX when you're healing. But we're going to do it on respawn, so you will get to see that one. Later, when we go over healing, we will, of course, add it to that function. We can only heal our shields right now over time, not our health. And again, the damage screen effect is specifically for health for me. So I just want to point that out. I don't have like a healing section, but if you do, you can simply disable the effects in there. So now I'm going to scroll down to my respawn function, and this is what we have in here. Everything in here is the same as it was, except for two things. One is a minor bug fix that I did not mention in the other respawn episodes. When we respawn, we should set the shields to be able to recharge. Otherwise, if we die and our shields are empty, they will not recharge. By default, when I respawn, I want to be able to get my full shield back, so I'm going to set can shields recharge to be true upon respawning. But what's important for today's episode is this part right here. We are going to call our disable and damage VFX. At this point, we are respawning. The character is no longer hurt. They're no longer within the 25% remaining health. So we want to make sure that we indicate that to the player by removing the damage VFX. So I'm going to call it disable damage VFX here. Now, that's everything we need to do in the code today. So let's go into the editor, and specifically, let's go to our base character blueprint. So I have base character BP. This is the character I'm controlling. I know you can't really see it because it's first person, but you can see them in the map. And so this is my base character. So any controllable characters will be a child of this. And in here, what we can do is handle the events that we have made in the code, and then we can pass data along to the HUD to display the screen effect properly. So since we made the enable damage VFX and disable damage VFX implementable events in the code, we can simply search for them, enable damaged VFX, and they will pop up. You want this event right here, and you can see it's a category of HUD. And once you select it, you'll get this node, and then of course grab your other one, disable damaged VFX. Now, if you've been following the series, we create our HUD when the character is spawned, and then we attach the HUD to the camera that the character is looking through. That's essentially how it works. So at this point, we have a HUD reference that we set up in begin play. I'll show you that really quickly. Most of the data in here isn't important for today's episode, but we do create a HUD in begin play, and then I set a reference to it. So my character HUD is this right here. We'll get into this in a minute or two, but just be aware that's what our HUD reference is. So now, with the two events that I have, I make sure that we have a HUD reference and it is valid, and if it is, we then call functions on the HUD itself. And so, quite literally, I have a HUD reference variable here, and I can get it. Then I can drag off of the HUD reference and type is valid to check for validity. Or you can right-click on the variable and convert it to a validated get to get what I have here. It does essentially the same thing, but it just makes it a little bit neater in my opinion since it is one node. So only if it's valid do we want to call these functions that we're going to set up on the HUD, but we don't have them yet, so we'll have to go create them. Add your HUD reference, validated get, to your enable damage VFX and disable damage VFX, and then go to your HUD. Now, in my HUD, I have added an image which represents the screen effect for the damage or the hurt or the bleeding, whatever it may be. So to show you what this is, before we go any farther, I have an image that I added and imported to the game, and it looks like this. It's really not important what this looks like or what these settings are because these are all default, but I will show you. This is exactly what I have. So I just have an image that is a PNG because PNGs support transparency, and we want to be able to see through the screen. And you can see that even the edges aren't fully opaque. They are a little bit transparent. We don't want to block the player from seeing anything. We just want to indicate to them that they are damaged. Now, to get a texture like I have here, if you have an image, you just add it to the folder in the game and it will automatically import, which point you will get a texture file. So it says texture, but really it's just an image that we added, which the engine automatically converts to a texture for you. You can see at the bottom of this pop-out, it says source file, and it is a PNG file. So it's just an image. Now, once you have this in here, we can actually add an image to our HUD that takes up the entire HUD, and then we can put it in the back behind everything, so everything renders on top of it, but we can still see the screen effect everywhere else where there's not elements on the HUD. Like the minimap is covering part of it, but behind it you can tell the screen effect is there. So simply put on the character HUD, you can add an image, and I put it all the way down at the bottom of the canvas panel, but wherever you put it is fine. The important part is when you go into your image, you set the Z order to be a very negative value. This is going to be behind probably everything. I can't think of anything you'd want to be behind this. You might have something, but it's still going to be very far in the back. It's going to be behind most of your elements. So put your Z order to something big. I put it to -100, and that should be fine. I mean, I think before this I might have a Z order of like, yeah, everything's 0 at this point because nothing else is overlapping, but I might have -1 at some point in another episode. So -100 should be more than fine. Then I select the image that we've added to the game. Now at this point, to get it to be the proper size of your canvas, you can choose one of these anchors here, and you can choose this big anchor in the bottom right, which is basically the whole parent element. We can just morph to it. This is good for resizing as well. So if you resize the window, or if the HUD has to be resized for any reason, this element will still take up the parent element, whatever it's resized to. So this is good to just fill the entire selection, and that's really what we want. So I recommend using this big anchor in the bottom, and then setting all your offsets to be 0 because you don't want it to be offset. We want it to take up all the bounds of the screen. At this point, I will show you the rest of the stuff on my image, but nothing here is really important except setting the visibility to be hidden. We don't want to show this at all times. You'll notice when we first load into the game, it is not automatically here. So it should be hidden by default. We will enable its visibility to be visible later on. So visibility hidden, and then here's the rest of what I have. I've called it damage screen effect image, and I've made it a variable. It is important that we make it a variable because we are going to make it visible in the blueprint, and we're also going to play an animation on it to give it that little pulse effect that you see. Let's go ahead and make the animation now. If you've never made an animation in a widget before, it's okay. I'll go over it with you. First thing we're going to need is to make sure we have the proper tabs. So you might have this animations tab already, but if you don't, you can go to Window, Animations. Then we need our timeline here, which if you're in Unreal Engine 4, it's different than if you're in Unreal Engine 5. So animations in Unreal Engine 5 automatically has all of this with it. But if you're in Unreal Engine 4, you'll have animation or animations, and then you'll have a timeline, and they are separate. Make sure you grab the timeline here as well. So you have animations and timeline. But either way, you should have something that looks similar to mine, no matter what version you're using. And we're going to want to add an animation, and that is going to be the pulsing. If you didn't really notice it the first time, that's okay. I'll give you a quick demo. So notice that when I take enough damage, the screen kind of flares up with red and then goes away. It is definitely not always there. It's not just a still image, it is a pulse, is how I would describe it. So I added an animation by pressing this button here, and I called it Hurt Effect Pulse. And that's what we're going for, that little flashing effect. Once you make an animation and name it, you can click on it to then edit the properties and actually create the animation. In here, you can press Add Track or Plus Track, and then you can select the widget or the slot that you want it on. For me, I've already selected it, so you won't see it in this list, but I want to grab the image that we added. So you go Plus Track, All Name Widgets, and then you can go to Damage Screen Effect Image. This is the canvas panel slot. So basically, if this slot gets replaced, it will still work. The animation will still play on that slot, whatever's in that slot. I'm specifically doing it on this image, so I'd recommend just using the regular damage screen effect image. Again, I already have it, so you can't see it in this list, but you can see examples like the health bar. It doesn't have the canvas panel slot in parentheses. So just select the damage screen effect image without the canvas panel slot. Once you do that, you'll get this right here. Now, you can open this up, and you will see all the tracks that you've added to that individual element. Right now, you don't have any, so yours just looks like this. But if you press the plus track here, you can add tracks on the individual element. Okay, so you use this plus track to edit different elements on your widget. And then you use this plus track to edit specific properties about this element on the widget. So now what I wanted is the color and opacity. So if you press plus track, you can choose any of these. And I chose color and opacity. And once you have your color and opacity in here, it will look something like this. Now the last thing we need to do is actually edit the field we want. So to get a pulse effect, and you can see it occurring above, all we really need to do is edit the alpha value. The alpha represents the transparency. So an alpha of 1.0 means it is fully opaque. You can't see through it. I mean, technically you can see through it because the image itself is transparent, but we're not adding any additional transparency on the image. Whatever it has when it was imported and made as a texture is 100%. But an alpha of 0 is fully transparent, and you can see it's completely invisible. So you can press these little plus signs. It's a circle with a plus. It's super small, so it can be hard to tell. But this sign in between the two arrows is to add a new key at that time. What I do is I go into my timeline here, and you won't have any of these keys to start, but I press a key right at 0 seconds. So I start the animation right away at 0 seconds. So you just press this button and it will add a key. I already have one, but just as an example, if I add it here, you'll see a key gets added at this second. So move your little scrubber to the 0 second mark, or really it will start on that value if you haven't moved it, and add a new key there. Then go to the length of the animation. I want it to be 2 seconds long for pulses. We're going to have it go one way and then back. That's what causes the pulse. One way and then back. So it's 2 seconds because it's 1 second to reach full opaque and then 1 second to reach full transparent. So I go 1 second out and I press the add new key button again. Then you will have 2 dots here on your timeline like I have. You can now click on these individual keys. So I can click on this one right here and I can change the value. By default, everything will be 1.0. I've made the alpha 0.0. That makes for a nice pulse effect. But if I wanted, I could make it 0.5, for example, and you'll see it will change the alpha of this image. Now, the other key should have 1.0, so as I move over to it, it should become less transparent. And you can see that it does. So if you want, play around with it, get the values you want, but I would recommend either 0 or close to 0 for the 0 second mark, and then close to 1 for the 1 second mark. So let's do 0.2. That way it doesn't ever fully go away between pulsing. And now you've made a widget animation for your screen hurt effect. If we go into the character HUD now, we can go into the graph, and we're going to make 2 new events that we're going to call from the base character BP when the events that we created in the code were called. So simply put, we can right click and type add custom event. and we can name them whatever we want here. So I called mine Show Damaged VFX and Hide Damaged VFX. Once you've made these two events, you can go to the base character blueprint and immediately call them before we even fill them out, just so we don't forget. So I drag off my HUD reference and I have my Show Damage VFX, which should come up now because we have the HUD reference here, which is a type character HUD, and we're creating events in our character HUD. So when we enable the damage VFX, I call Show Damage VFX. When we're disabling the damage VFX, I'm calling my Hide Damage VFX. Show, hide, enable, disable. All right. So once you get these events called, you're done in the base character blueprint. Let's go back into the character HUD and let's fill out these events. Now in here, what I want to do is set the screen effect to be visible when we're going to show it and then play the animation. And when we're going to hide it, we're going to set the visibility to be hidden and we're going to stop the animation from playing. So we have our damage screen effect, which you should have made a variable. This is our image, and we can simply drag off of it and call set visibility and leave it as visible. That's what we got right here. Now, in your variables list, when you create animations, there will automatically be a little folder that's added here called animations. You can open it up and grab the animations inside. Here's our hurt effect pulse. You'll notice if I go to my designer, that is what I called my animation that we just created. So I want to drag that into the graph, hurt effect pulse, and then drag off of it and type play animation. Now you get this big node right here. There's a few things you can do here. You can change the time it starts at, the number of loops that it plays, the play mode, the speed, and you can set it to restore state, which means that the widgets will go back to whatever state they were in before the animation began. For me, I don't really need too much here. There's two main things that I care about. The number of loops to play I set to 0 because as you can see in this little pop-out menu, the number of times to loop this animation, 0 to loop indefinitely. So if we set it to 0, it will keep looping until we tell it to stop or until we stop the animation. We're going to manually stop the animation, so I want it to loop forever until we do that. So I set num loops to play to 0, and I set the play mode to ping pong. You have forward, reverse, and ping pong. Forward is going to play forward. And then it's immediately going to loop back, no time in between, and then play again. And then immediately loop back and play again. It's going to look a little abrupt. It's not going to flow as well. Reverse is going to just go the opposite direction, right? So you're going to start at your ending and go back down to this, but then it's immediately going to fly back to this, and then you're going to go down again, and then immediately fly back. Ping pong is what we want. It's got kind of a funny name, but it makes sense. It's going to go from one to the other, and then from that one back to the other, nice and slow. It's going to create this nice pulse animation. So there we go. That's what we want for our play animation. And that's show damage VFX as well. So now we just have to implement hide damage VFX. And to do this, we're going to grab our damage screen effect image once again, and we're going to set visibility, but this time instead of being visible, we're going to set it to hidden. So just like it was in the designer view by default. We can't see it anymore. Also, we want to go ahead and stop the animation at this point. It's good for a few reasons, one of them just being performance. We don't want to be playing animations we can't see. It's not necessary, it doesn't help anybody. So if you grab your animation and just drag off of it, you can call stop animation. And just like that, you have yourself a hurt and damaged screen effect. So if you go and play now, you should be able to injure yourself, and at that point you will play the hurt or damaged screen effect, and it will keep looping until you either heal or you die, and then it will reset. When you respawn, you'll stand back up and the screen effect will be gone. So there you go, guys. I hope this video helped you create a screen effect, and if it did, please subscribe. It does more for myself and the channel than anything else you can do, and I just really appreciate it. I want to give a huge shout out again to my YouTube membership and Patreon members and supporters. Thank you guys for everything, and if you want to support this channel or recommend any ideas to make tutorials on, then feel free to check out the Patreon. If you had any issues with this tutorial or any of my tutorials, feel free to join the Discord community. I would be happy to help you out with any issues that you had and get you sorted so you can keep working on your game. But other than that, guys, that's all I got for you, so thank you so much for watching. I'm Shawnthebro, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye, guys.